Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Ready to jump straight in and get the insights that matter. That's what we do here. Arm you with knowledge, quick but thorough, so you walk away informed, maybe even surprised.
Exactly. And today, we're continuing that mission. This is actually the second of three deep dives looking into poltergeist phenomena. It's all based on Dr. Summers' research, the curator of the Forbidden Histories YouTube
Oh,
channel.
yes, Forbidden Histories. Great stuff.
So if you joined us for part one, welcome back. If not, you might want to check that out later because we covered some, well, pretty foundational groundwork.
Absolutely. Let's maybe quickly recap where we left off. Last time, we found out some really surprising things, didn't we? Like back in the 1660s, the Royal Society in London. I mean, this major hub of early experimental science, kind of like the CERN of its day.
Right.
They were actually interested in poltergeists. People like Robert Boyle, a giant in science history. He wasn't dismissing these reports. He was telling colleagues, go investigate. The goal was verification, using scientific methods, not debunking.
Precisely. And what Dr. Summers' work really highlights is that the later decline in that open-mindedness, especially during the Enlightenment, it wasn't really science itself saying this is nonsense. It was largely these, well, polemical writers, people arguing really aggressively in print.
Polemical, meaning just writers arguing fiercely.
Yeah, exactly. Fiercely and often trying to shut down debate. They basically outlawed any empirical look at the occult, a real scorched earth approach, you could say.
Right, just shut it all down. But not everyone bought into that, did they? We mentioned Lessing in Germany, a major Enlightenment figure, but he wasn't keen on just dismissing everything out of hand. He saw something worth looking at.
That's a key point. It shows that thread of curiosity never completely vanished. So building on that, this time we're tracing how that scientific interest, maybe sometimes quietly, continued into the 19th and early 20th centuries. And you might be surprised who kept looking into this stuff.
Okay, and this is where I think you said it gets really interesting, the emergence of modern spiritualism in the 1840s.
Yes, exactly. It's a huge part of the story. The whole spiritualist movement basically exploded out of a reported poltergeist case. It happened in Hydesville, upstate New York. A little cabin, the Fox family lived there.
The Fox family, right.
And these strange knocks started happening. Raps on the walls, furniture, seemed random at first, but they seemed to center around the teenage daughters Leah, Kate, and Maggie.
Okay, so typical poltergeist focus on adolescence. Kind of.
Sort of fits the pattern, yes. But what's fascinating here is how quickly they developed a way to, well, talk to whatever was making the noise. Investigators would ask questions, then slowly recite the alphabet, A, B, C.
And wait for a knock?
Exactly. A knock would mean yes, or signal a specific letter. They'd piece together words, then sentences. It's basically the same method used later with knocking tables, tilting tables, seances, essentially.
Wow, so that responsiveness, that was the key thing. It wasn't just random banging anymore.
That was absolutely crucial. It felt like intelligence, like communication. It changed everything.
And the impact was huge, you said.
Oh, dramatic. The local press got onto it, then national. Suddenly, the Fox sisters are famous. It launched these really long and frankly quite tragic careers for them as celebrity mediums.
Tragic how?
Well, like a lot of child stars, really. Later life brought scandals, accusations of fraud, alcoholism, you know the pattern. There was that famous incident in the 1880s, I think it was Margaret, one of the sisters, publicly confessed it was all fake.
She confessed, so it was fraud.
Well, she said it was, but then later on, she actually recanted that confession, took it back. So it's complicated, leaves you wondering.
Adds another layer, definitely.
But honestly, by the time of that confession and retraction, it almost didn't matter for the movement itself. Spiritualism was already massive, a global thing. All thanks to that initial press coverage of Hydesville, people everywhere started trying it themselves, sitting around tables, hoping for knocks.
Just ordinary people in their homes.
Yeah, all walks of life. Trying to get those responsive raps was very accessible, and it didn't take long for things to escalate. The spirits, supposedly, started writing or speaking through people. Often these mediums would seem to be in a trance or a state of, like, voluntary possession. A bit like shamans in some cultures, actually.
So it went way beyond just knocks and taps.
Oh, yeah. Much more spectacular stuff became common, things that sound very much like classic poltergeist reports. You had claims of, visible spirit forms materializing, objects levitating, things appearing and disappearing, full-on apparitions sometimes.
That's quite a leap from simple knocks.
It is.
Yeah.
But if you connected back, that core idea of responsiveness from the Hydesville case was key, the idea that you could interact with it. And interestingly, you can see hints of that responsiveness in some much older cases too, like one investigated by Boyle's buddies at the Royal Society, or the stuff that puzzled Lessing, suggests maybe there's a consistent feature being observed, even if the interpretation changes wildly.
Which brings us to interpretations, right? How people understood what was happening.
Exactly. That started to change dramatically. Think back to Boyle and his colleagues in the 1660s. They might have believed some cases were real, sure, but their world was deeply religious. So for them, it had to be devils or evil spirits. That was the framework.
Divine or demonic, basically.
Pretty much. Now, fast forward to the 19th century spiritualists, they weren't really scared of devils or hell in the same way at all.
That's a big difference. Why weren't they?
Well, that's one of the main appeals of spiritualism. It offered a much more optimistic cosmology. Instead of eternal damnation, which was, standard Christian doctrine for many,
Right.
spiritualism suggested something else. They believed in a kind of cosmic evolution. Even the worst soul could progress, could move forward. Once they felt regret, genuinely wanted to be kinder. They could evolve spiritually. Now, this wasn't Darwinian evolution by natural selection, obviously. It was about spiritual growth.
Okay, but that's still fascinating timing. Because Charles Darwin, Mr. Evolution himself, he was completely against spiritualism, right? Thought it was bunk.
He did, yes. Fundamentally opposed. But here's where popular history maybe simplifies things a bit. Darwin's very negative view wasn't necessarily representative of all scientific thinking at the time.
Oh.
Consider Alfred Russel Wallace.
Wallace, the other guy who came up with natural selection, independently of Darwin.
The one, co-discoverer of modern evolutionary theory. And Wallace, he was a devout spiritualist. And pretty open about it, too.
Wow. So the co-founder of evolutionary theory believed in this stuff.
He absolutely did. And for Wallace, it wasn't just a casual belief. It informed his worldview. He certainly believed poltergeist phenomena were real. But he didn't see them as demonic. He attributed them to, quote, undeveloped spirits.
Undeveloped, meaning what exactly?
Yeah.
Like immature ghosts.
Sort of. In the spiritualist view, it implied spirits that were less evolved, maybe mischievous or confused, but not inherently evil like demons. It just shows the relationship between evolutionary ideas and, well, the occult or spiritualism back then was much more tangled and complex than we usually think. Not a simple conflict narrative.
That definitely complicates the picture. So spiritualism was huge, Wallace believed. But you said spiritualist interpretations started to decline in science.
They did, yes. By the late 1800s, things were shifting within the scientific community. You still had some major figures open to it, like Camille Flammarion, the French astronomer. He published a big collection of cases in 1923. And he was still open to the idea that spirits might be involved in some cases, but he was becoming one of the last major scientific figures holding that view.
So what replaced it? If scientists were still interested, but not thinking spirits.
Well, that's the next big turn. Starting in the late 1800s, you get a totally new approach emerging, often driven by scientists who were non-religious, maybe even anti-religious. They weren't interested in proving a spirit world. They were looking for, well, other explanations, natural ones.
Okay, so by the 1920s, spirits are fading as the go-to scientific explanation, but the phenomena themselves are still on the table for study.
Precisely. When Flammarion published his book in 23, spiritualist interpretations were definitely declining in scientific circles. But that didn't mean scientists just ignored the reports. They just started looking at them differently, thinking about psychology, maybe unknown physical forces, electromagnetism, that kind of thing. Not necessarily spirits.
So thinking about today, movies, pop culture, they still mostly go with the ghost idea, right? Like Spielberg's Poltergeist.
Overwhelmingly, yes. The traditional spirit idea is sticky in popular culture.
But the scientific trajectory was different. It started with Boyle, often trying to prove a spirit world, maybe with religious aims. But by the late 1800s, that religious motivation in the scientific inquiry really started to fade out.
That's a great summary. It became less about proving faith and more about understanding the mechanics, whatever they might be. A shift from who to how. And that very shift, focusing on the how without spirits, is exactly what we're going to unpack in part 3, our final installment on this. We'll look closely at those non-spiritualist investigators and the, frankly, quite fascinating theories they came up with. It'll help make sense of things like, well, you might have seen pictures of Marie Curie sitting with a medium.
Marie Curie,
Yeah.
the physicist, with a medium.
Yep, that Marie Curie. A medium claimed to produce poltergeist-type physical effects. We'll explore the context for why scientists like her were even looking at this stuff.
Wow, okay. Definitely need to tune in for that.
Yeah.
So maybe a final thought for listeners to chew on until then. Just consider what this journey from Boyle to spiritualism to these later investigators tells us about science itself, how it grapples with the weird stuff, how it shifts, adapts, sometimes rejects, sometimes reevaluates things across time. It's quite a story about how we try to understand our world.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you want to dig deeper into the sources for all this, Dr. Summers' academic references are listed on the website. You can find a link for that right there in the description box.